Some UK towns are, to put it lightly, grim. Towns where the running joke is that its best feature is the motorway leaving it. Places where residents tell reporters they're genuinely afraid of being knifed in the street, and the High Street looks less like a shopping destination and more like a set for a post-apocalyptic film. One such town stands out head and shoulders above the rest. It's become an archetype of misery, the final boss of British urban decline. Welcome to Luton. This whole situation might sound like a satirical joke, but the reality is even stranger. For years, this town in Bedfordshire has been the undisputed champion of a miserable national contest, being voted as the single worst place to live in Britain. Yet, this narrative of decay is fiercely rejected by the 250,000 people who actually live there. A community that defends its home with a stubborn underdog pride, tired of seeing it used as a national punchline. That miserable crown Luton wears so well is awarded by the brilliantly snarky website I Live Here. Its annual poll has made a national sport out of roasting the UK's most depressing towns. In 2023, Luton left every other town in the dust to claim the top prize, the undisputed champion of awful. It beat out perennial contenders like Bradford, Slough, and even the seaside shantytown of Jaywick. But here's the thing about internet polls. They're a fantastic source of savage comedy, but they're not exactly scientific data. They're driven by reputation, by memes, and by people who probably just had a bad layover at Luton Airport. So, we decided to dig past the insults and into the reality. We looked at the police data, the government reports, and the stories of the people who live there day in, day out. And what we found is a picture so much more complex than a simple online smackdown. Let's start with the big one, crime. Because when you talk to people about Luton, this is the first thing that comes up. And yeah, it's a serious problem. According to Bedfordshire police data, Luton's crime rate is significantly higher than the national average. In some parts of town, it feels like you're playing life on a higher difficulty setting. One long-term resident, Sandra Winter, told The Express she was leaving the town after 29 years because it had gotten progressively worse, citing open drug dealing and a fear of being attacked. Another resident, 83-year-old Peter Vaughan, who's lived in Luton for half a century, doesn't mince his words. When asked about its reputation as the worst place in the UK, he told The Sun, "It's the worst place in the world. At night you find police helicopters keeping us up looking for drug dealers." And let's not forget Luton's television fame. The town is the star of the Channel 4 show 24 Hours in Police Custody, which essentially serves as a weekly highlights reel of the worst things happening in the area. For the rest of the country, their main exposure to Luton is watching its police force deal with stabbings, drug raids, and domestic disputes. But the fear of crime is only part of the story. The other part is the visual decay. For many, Luton's High Street is a physical manifestation of its broken reputation. It's a landscape of shuttered shops, graffiti-covered walls, and boarded-up windows. The ghosts of forgotten businesses like BHS and Debenhams haunt the main streets. It has that uniquely British aura of a place that's been utterly left behind by the modern economy. To be fair, this isn't entirely Luton's own fault. It's a classic story of post-industrial collapse. For most of the 20th century, Luton was a powerhouse, a proud working-class town built around the massive Vauxhall Motors plant. Generations of families worked there. But then, in 2002, the car factory closed. Almost 2,000 jobs vanished overnight, and the economic shockwave shattered the town's foundation. This economic collapse feeds directly into the next issue, deprivation. Multiple government studies have ranked parts of Luton among the most deprived areas in all of England. In some of the town's wards, the life expectancy is a full 10 years lower than the national average. Preventable mortality rates are higher too, meaning people are dying from illnesses that could and should have been treated if only they had access to better healthcare, lived in better conditions, or had more economic stability. Public services are stretched to their breaking point, schools are struggling, social care is underfunded, and in some areas, housing is cramped and overcrowded. You throw all of these ingredients into a pot and you get a recipe for hopelessness, anger, and social friction. That's where the narrative takes an even darker turn, to the one label that has haunted Luton for over 2 decades, its association with extremism. Back in the early 2000s, Luton became infamous as a hub for radical preachers like Anjem Chowdhury and his banned group Al Muhajirun. They held provocative demonstrations, they engaged in extremist recruitment. And most notoriously, they protested against British soldiers returning from the war in Afghanistan. The media spotlight was intense, and the town was branded, fairly or unfairly, as a breeding ground for terrorism. That reputation became a stain that's proven impossible to wash out. Even today, whenever there's a national security incident, Luton's name often gets dragged back into the conversation. At this point, you're probably thinking, case closed, it really is the worst place in Britain. But this is where the story flips. Because if you actually stop and talk to the people who live in Luton, who have built their lives and raised their families there, a completely different picture begins to emerge. Yes, they'll tell you about the problems. They're not naive, but then they'll tell you about the town's hidden strengths. Let's start with the most practical one, housing. Compared to the insanity of the London property market, Luton is incredibly affordable. The average house price here is hundreds of thousands of pounds cheaper than in the capital. You can buy a whole family home in Luton for the price of a small studio flat, or maybe just a parking spot in Kensington. While many might call it a dump, for the first-time buyers, young families, and working-class people priced out of everywhere else, Luton represents a much-needed lifeline. It's one of the few places within commuting distance of London where the dream of owning a home is still alive. And that brings us to superpower number 2, location. Luton is a commuter's dream. It's just 30 miles north of London with direct trains that can get you into St. Pancras International in as little as 25 minutes. It's right next to the M1 motorway, connecting it to the entire country, and of course, it has a major international airport. You can finish work in London and be on a flight to Ibiza a few hours later. Luton is the ultimate life hack for people who need access to London but can't afford to live there. And if you're willing to travel just a bit out of the town centre, this grubby old town gives way to some surprisingly nice countryside. Drive 10 minutes out of the town centre and you end up surrounded by natural beauty. A little further and you'll hit the Chiltern Hills, a designated area of outstanding natural beauty. Luton has this incredible two-faced identity. The gritty urban core and the idyllic English countryside right on its doorstep. It's a contrast that completely shatters the image of a non-stop concrete jungle. So, this brings us back to the big question. If Luton has all these good things going for it, why does it keep ending up at the bottom of the barrel? Why the terrible reputation? In one article, a local councillor suggested that Luton is an easy target precisely because it's working class and multi-ethnic. It doesn't fit the quaint, cozy ideal of an English town, so it gets looked down on. There's also its sheer visibility. Being so close to London, its problems get magnified by the national media in a way that a struggling town in a more remote part of the country might not. Then there's the issue of perception lag. Reputations are sticky. Towns can change, but the stories we tell about them often don't. People still associate Luton with the extremist headlines of the 2000s or the factory closure of 2002. Once a place gets labelled the worst, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Businesses are reluctant to invest. Ambitious young people feel they have to leave. Politicians might see it as a lost cause, and the cycle of decline continues because nobody expects it to get better. But here's the final twist in the tale. That cycle might just be about to break. Luton may, against all odds, be on the verge of a comeback. The town has recently secured tens of millions of pounds in funding from the UK government's Towns Fund and Levelling Up initiatives. There's a new energy in the local council, a push to attract investment and reshape the town's battered identity. For the first time in a long time, there's tangible reason for hope. So, is Luton a mess? In many ways, yes. Is it a dangerous place? In certain parts, at certain times, absolutely. Does it have a mountain to climb? Without a single doubt. But what do you reckon? Is Luton really the worst place in the UK, or is it getting an unfairly bad rap? And is there a place in the UK you think is even worse? Drop your stories in the comments below, we'd love to hear your take. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, give us a like, hit subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Cheers for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.